June 4th, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky leads 32 SBD Dauntless dive bombers over open Pacific and finds nothing. The Japanese carriers weren't where they should be. Fuel gauges dropping. 15 minutes before 33 aircraft hit the water, then McClusky spots it. A white wake cutting northeast at full speed. The Arashi racing to rejoin the main fleet after hunting an American submarine. No protocol authorized what McClusky does next. No order covers it. He breaks formation, follows the wake. One gut call. The battle turns on it. 10:22 a.m. June 4th, 1942. Wade McClusky's dive bombers crest above Kido Butai. No fighter opposition, zero cap still at wave height. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie's Yorktown bombers arrive from the northeast at the same moment. An accidental convergence no operations planner put on paper. 37 SBDs from Enterprise roll into their attack dives on Kaga and Akagi. A miscommunication sends nearly both squadrons onto Kaga alone. Lieutenant Richard Halsey Best pulls out of his dive over Kaga, judges her doomed, and redirects his 2 remaining wingmen north toward Akagi. Kaga takes 3 direct hits. 1 bomb strikes just forward of the bridge, killing Captain Jisaku Okada and his senior officers instantly. Akagi, flagship of the Pearl Harbor strike, takes a single direct hit, her deck, packed with armed, fueled aircraft. The secondary explosions tear through her from below. Leslie's Yorktown bombers put Soryu down in the same 2-minute window. 3 fleet carriers, 3 pyres. 3 carriers, Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, gone before sunset. Hundreds of aircraft pulled beneath the Pacific with them. The Hiryū, the 4th carrier, still floats. That problem remains unsolved. 14 days before the dive bombers arrive, the battle is already being decided in a basement in Pearl Harbor. Commander Joseph Rochefort's team at Station Hypo has partially broken JN-25B, the Imperial Japanese Navy's operational cipher. Rochefort pins the Japanese target as a location codenamed AF. Washington's OP-20G rejects him outright. Their analysts place the strike somewhere else entirely in the Pacific. Rochefort needs proof. His team devises a bluff. Midway transmits in the clear that its water desalination plant has failed. Now they wait to see if Tokyo takes the bait. Within 48 hours, Japanese intercepts report that AF is short on fresh water. Nimitz commits 3 carriers, 233 carrier aircraft, and 127 land-based aircraft at Midway to an ambush built on a single forged distress call. On May 19, 1942, Rochefort's team ran the bluff, and Yamamoto swallowed it. Yamamoto assembled 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryū, 7 battleships, 150 support vessels, 248 carrier aircraft, and 15 submarines. 150 support ships. Laid end to end, that column of steel stretches beyond the horizon, a wall of iron the Pacific had never carried. Against that, Nimitz held 3 carriers, 50 support ships, and 233 carrier aircraft, plus 127 land-based aircraft operating from the atoll itself. Japan held the initiative, the numbers, and the strategic logic. Midway was the last island barrier standing between Yamamoto's fleet and Hawaii. Japan arrived with a decade of naval buildup. America answered with 3 carriers and a bluff. Yamamoto divided his fleet into 7 separate task forces stretched across 1,500 miles of open Pacific. His own flagship, the Yamato, the heaviest warship ever built, sat well behind the carriers, separated from Kido Butai by design. Yamamoto kept his battleships back, holding them for a decisive surface engagement that never came. The carriers fought and burned while the Yamato's massive guns pointed at open water. A diversionary strike against the Aleutian Islands pulled Japanese carrier strength north, away from the main engagement. The logic was sound. Force the Americans to respond to multiple threats simultaneously, divide their attention, paralyze their decision-making. The flaw ran straight through the architecture. Every element of Yamamoto's plan assumed the Americans had no idea what was coming. At 6:30 a.m. on June 4, 1942, Nagumo's first strike wave hits Midway. The airfield survives. The strike commander radios back. A second attack is necessary. Nagumo's reserve aircraft below decks are a mixed picture. His torpedo bombers sit armed with anti-ship torpedoes. His dive bombers carry nothing. They launched the first strike wave and came back empty. Now his strike commander is radioing from over Midway. The airfield is still operational. Hit it again. That means rearming the torpedo bombers, pulling their ship-killing torpedoes and loading land attack bombs instead. The dive bombers need ordnance loaded from scratch. Crews work by hand in cramped hangars, moving heavy munitions through tight passageways. It is slow, physical, dangerous work. Nagumo orders the rearm. Weapons come off planes. New ones go on. The hangars fill with loose ordnance. Torpedoes stacked against bulkheads. Bombs waiting for their aircraft. The clock starts moving against him. At 7:28 a.m., a scout plane radios in. American ships to the northeast. No carrier confirmation. Nagumo halts the rearming mid-cycle. The order reverses. At 8:20, the scout confirms it. A carrier. Nagumo orders the torpedo loadout restored. The second reversal in under an hour. Elevators run both directions at once. The Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, none can launch. None can recover their returning aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 8 launched from Hornet on the morning of June 4th with 15 TBD Devastators, no fighter escort, and no realistic chance of return. Skipper John Waldron led them straight into the combat air patrol over Kido Butai. Mitsubishi Zeros dropped on the formation before a single torpedo left the rails. All 15 aircraft hit the water. One man survived. Ensign George Gay, shot down attacking carrier Soryu, clung to a seat cushion and hid beneath it. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise and Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown flew the same corridor into the same guns. VT-6 lost 9 of 14 aircraft. VT-3 lost 10 of 12. The Zeros were still hunting when the last torpedo plane went into the water. The losses were catastrophic. The American Mark 13 torpedoes, notoriously unreliable, running shallow, running wide, drew no killing blow. Kido Butai kept moving, but the attacks had done several things Nagumo could not undo. The Zeros had been dragged down to wave height, chasing slow torpedo planes through the deck of the ocean. The Japanese carriers had been forced to maneuver hard and repeatedly, breaking apart the rearming cycle below decks, ordnance already in motion, flight operations already fractured. Kido Butai was off balance. McClusky's dive bombers were already overhead. No fighter opposition. Nothing between them and the carriers below. 0 torpedo hits. Every aircraft, every crew, every minute of that approach, Japanese ships steamed on untouched. The math was catastrophic. The effect was not. Rear Admiral Taemon Yamaguchi sent 18 Val dive bombers north, guided by a Chikuma float plane already tracking the American task force. At noon on June 4th, those bombers found USS Yorktown. 3 bombs struck her flight deck. Fires ignited across her hangar. From a distance, she looked finished. Yorktown's damage control parties moved fast. Fires were under control within the hour. Her crew patched enough of the damage to get her back underway. Japanese pilots reporting back to Hiryū described a carrier dead in the water, black smoke still rising. Their strike commanders logged her as finished. She was not finished. Yamaguchi launched a second strike at 2:42 p.m., 10 Kate torpedo bombers. 2 Type 91 torpedoes struck Yorktown's port side within 30 seconds. She took a 23-degree list. Yamaguchi's second strike pilots came back convinced they had hit a different carrier than the first wave had struck. Both waves had hit Yorktown. The same ship, struck twice in the same afternoon, listing hard to port, losing power. Hiryū's air group had spent 2 full strike packages on a single target. Yamaguchi logged American carrier strength as effectively neutralized. He was wrong. The accounting was wrong. 2 strikes, one carrier. And somewhere to the northeast, the Enterprise and Hornet were untouched. The clock on Hiryū was already running. At 5:00 p.m. on June 4th, 24 SBD Dauntlesses, Enterprise's own and the orphaned air group from the stricken Yorktown, found Hiryū. 4 bombs struck her flight deck. Below decks, stacked ordnance, fueled aircraft, compressed passageways, the same conditions that killed Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu ignited again. Hiryū burned through the night. By dawn on June 5th, she was beyond saving. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi had commanded the only carrier that struck back. He launched 2 full strike packages, burned through his air group, and still lost. As the end approached, Yamaguchi declined to leave. Captain Tomeo Kaku stayed with him. Hundreds of crew members remained aboard as well, some by choice, some trapped below, some rescued only in the final minutes before she went under. Hiryū slipped beneath the Pacific at 9:12 a.m. on June 5, 1942. 4 fleet carriers, gone in less than 24 hours. The most powerful carrier force Japan ever assembled, the same force that hit Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier, was at the bottom of the ocean. All 4 carriers of Kido Butai, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryū, the same 4 that struck Pearl Harbor, gone within 30 hours. 4 carriers gone. The entire striking force built across a decade of imperial naval investment ceased to exist before sunset. Japan lost all 4 fleet carriers, 292 aircraft, and roughly 3,500 men. The aircraft were replaceable. Japanese industry continued to produce replacement aircraft at scale throughout 1942. The pilots were not replaceable. Japan's naval aviation program was among the most demanding in the world. Candidates washed out at every stage, and the training pipeline from selection to carrier qualification took years. The men flying off Kido Butai in June 1942 represented the concentrated output of that system. Many were veterans of China, of Pearl Harbor, of every major Pacific engagement since 1941, experienced aviators who understood formation flying, torpedo approach angles, dive bombing under fire. That institutional knowledge sank with the carriers. Japan continued to produce aircraft. Replacement pilots entered the fleet. The gap was not in machines. It was in the hours, the judgment, the combat experience that could not be manufactured on a production schedule. Against that, the United States lost 1 carrier, 145 aircraft, and 307 men. Those numbers belong to different categories of strategic consequence. American industry was outpacing Japan's shipyards. Japan's entire strategic logic required a fast, decisive victory. Before that gap became unbridgeable. The outcome at Midway rested on 5 sequential decisions, each one a genuine branch point where the opposite choice was fully available. Rochefort's water plant ruse fails. Nimitz has no confirmation that AF is Midway, and 3 carriers stay in Pearl Harbor instead of sailing north. McClusky hits his fuel threshold and breaks off. Kido Butai completes its rearm cycle, launches a full strike wave, and slams into the American carriers with nothing between them and the bombs. The torpedo squadrons fly level. Zeros hold altitude, and McClusky's dive bombers at 14,000 feet absorb the same annihilation that consumed Torpedo 8. If Nagumo had launched his reserve aircraft before the scout plane's report came in, they would have gone up still armed for a second strike on Midway. Land attack bombs, not anti-ship torpedoes. The decks would have cleared. The hangars would have been empty. Ordnance stowed and secured. Zeros holding altitude where they belonged. What McClusky found instead was a fleet mid-reversal. Nagumo had ordered his torpedo bombers rearmed for land attack after the first strike. Commander called for a second hit on Midway. Then the scout report arrived. American ships to the northeast. Possible carrier. The order reversed. Torpedoes back on. Below decks, crews were already moving ordnance by hand through cramped passageways. Bombs coming off. Anti-ship weapons going back on, neither cycle was complete. The flight decks were blocked by aircraft that could not yet launch. The Zeros had been dragged down to wave-top altitude chasing the American torpedo squadrons, leaving the sky above the fleet unguarded. That gap, indecision above, disorder below, fighters out of position, was the exact window McClusky's Dauntlesses dropped through. It was already closing. The torpedo squadrons that flew into annihilation had burned minutes and forced evasive maneuvers that fractured the rearm cycle further. The window held just long enough. All 5 variables broke the same direction within 6 hours on June 4, 1942. The Americans won every coin flip and called it a victory. Japan never launches another major strategic offensive after June 4, 1942. Every campaign that follows, Guadalcanal, Leyte Gulf, is reactive. The mobile carrier striking power Japan built across a decade, the force that hit Pearl Harbor, never reconstitutes. An operational amputation. McClusky followed a wake. Rochefort ran a ruse. Torpedo Squadron 8 flew into annihilation. 3 acts, 1 6-minute window, the shape of the Pacific, fixed.